Why Boston? Why is this a interesting startup town?
Yeah, so that's a favorite subject of mine, probably because everybody's got to have an explanation when they're not like in the traditional center of the world. But I think Boston is a really good place for hardware companies, especially because there's a lot of real hard technology here. But just in general for technology companies, because people are more serious here, I think, than in the Bay Area, and they work harder at harder problems, and they're willing to commit.
So is that a fight? Are you starting a fight?
I think I just started a fight.
Scream
yeah.
into the microphone, apparently.
Yeah.
Or you want to take this one? This might be more direct. Test, test, test. All right. So you went to a community college here locally. It's MIT. And
very funny.
What kind of talent comes out of it? What kind of talent comes out of MIT? Is it what? If I were a VC or if I were a startup guy who wanted to move to Boston, what could I get here?
I think it's similar to like the Boston-San Francisco split is like the MIT-Stanford split is people are kind of more heads down here and are willing to work hard on hard problems and really focus. And there's a lot less of like, oh, hey, here's a cool project I'm working on. Why don't you come join me? And people are, and that's what we need for solving bigger problems like we're doing.
All right, so to get into a little more on your specific expertise, I want to talk a little bit about 3D printing. So why don't you describe, have you guys all seen the Form 1? Raise your hand if you've seen it. You've never seen this thing? It looks like a space alien's like egg. Why don't you describe what it does?
The Form 1 is, we call it a prosumer desktop 3D printer, and so it's a little box about that size, and it makes really beautiful high-resolution parts, unlike anything you can get out of any other desktop 3D printer.
So this is, you guys are completely local. You're manufacturing where?
We're manufacturing at a contract manufacturer in California.
But you're not are you manufacturing overseas at all?
We have some stuff that comes from China, but the majority of the cost is in the U.S., and we're happy with that right now.
So for these guys who are thinking about maybe doing a crowdfunding thing or a Kickstarter or Indiegogo sort of situation, you guys, what was your total funding on Kickstarter?
We raised about $2.9 million when we went on Kickstarter.
When you started, you were just some dudes in a dorm room, just like eating ramen and smoking a lot.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, no, you're a master's student, so you're drinking a lot.
Yeah, because you don't smoke after you go to graduate school.
I wanted to talk a little bit about 3D printed guns, and since you're a 3D guy, the question is, in terms of 3D printed guns, are you shipping a file that contains the gun? Are you shipping a gun? What is, in your opinion, in this like philosophical question of if a 3D printed gun is an actual weapon?
My opinion on the matter is, first of all, guns are like 800-year-old technology. You can make a gun in your basement with all kinds of tools, probably better than you can on most desktop 3D printers. But I think that the whole gun debate actually sparks a really interesting question, which is, how does technology change our policy about controlling possession of certain items? Because it someday, maybe not quite yet, but someday it will be the case that controlling access to a physical item doesn't mean anything anymore because the design is equally useful. And I think that's the most interesting thing about the debate about 3D printed guns right now.
So all the 3D printed gun guys, are they doing this for attention? Are they doing this as proof of concept? What do you think's happening?
Well, there's this guy, Cody Wilson, who's the one who's been getting a lot of press talking about making a 3D printed gun, and he tries to be very provocative about it. But I think he's a smart guy, and I think he has a little deeper message than just like, hey, let's all have guns. It's more about, let's talk about what happens when putting a serial number on the gun and keeping track of that doesn't help anymore.
Can you print a gun on a Form 1?
You could print some things on the Form 1, yeah.
Okay, interesting. So going back to the Kickstarter thing, I'm sorry. So you guys raised 2.9, and what advice would you give to, I guess, a small startup who's just starting out, maybe wants to do hard, maybe even wants to do software? Do you go to a VC? Do you do the Kickstarter route? Why did you guys do the Kickstarter route?
Well, so we actually raised a seed round of $1.8 million before we went on Kickstarter, and we definitely could not have had the success we did on Kickstarter without getting to a more complete product and doing like a full-blown campaign. But I mean, Kickstarter was crowdfunding was amazing for us, and I think for people doing something similar, some kind of new consumer product, it's a really great way to get started, to fund some of your production, and to most importantly, kind of go from like 0 customers and fan base, et cetera, to, to a huge amount in 1 month. There's no other way to do that.
Well, how do you get that initial investment? What did you guys specifically have? What was your secret sauce?
So we built a prototype, a really primitive prototype of the Form 1, basically a stereolithography 3D printer, and we made some great parts on it, and then we spent a whole lot of time pitching and making PowerPoint decks and doing a lot of stuff that wasn't making 3D printers. So that was a long, painful period, but we made it through.
All right, so is Boston more a hardware town, a software town? What's the future here?
I think it's a really good place for hardware. I also think it's a really good place for kind of sort of more professional, less consumer stuff like we're doing.
All right, perfect. This is Max Lubovsky. You guys have to talk to him. He's an amazing guy.